Great to be here today. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to panel 22, ensuring cybersecurity across the acquisition ecosystem. I really appreciate all of you joining us at this 19th annual Acquisition Research Symposium, hosted by the Acquisition Research Program at the Naval Postgraduate School. Hey, first off, I want to thank NPS for hosting this exciting event. I know some terrific presentations and panels previously, really exciting discussions. And so thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. And I'm also excited to be on this panel today with this very distinguished group of scholars and professionals. And my name is Rear Admiral Kurt Rothenhaus. I'm the Program Executive Officer for Command and Control, Communications, Computers, and Intelligence. And I serve alongside the great team here in San Diego and around the globe that delivers cyber, intel, SIGINT networks, and communication systems to our ships, submarines, and tactical shore stations for the United States Navy, and proudly serving those sailors and Marines and the Joint Force with those capabilities that this team here delivers. And so first off, as I mentioned, I'm honored to be joined by some terrific panelists. First, Chad Dacus from the Air Force Cyber College. He'll be with us today, as well as Fred Schenker from Carnegie Mellon University, and then Miss Erin Butkowski from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. As we get started, I encourage you to use that QA box at the bottom of your screen to pose questions. For the panelists, and we'll as we get into that Q&A phase, we'll go through those and start having a great dialogue as we get this conversation going. If you could go to the next slide, I think I talked about the panel. And then go to that cyber, DevOps, and digitization. Wonderful. Hey, thank you. So I wanted to start out with our Navy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, and our Chief of Naval Operations guidance here. And that's those blocks in the upper left there as it relates to the panel today. First off, for the ASN, that mission accomplishment drivers includes software and data rights and cyber as a part of that. So I think exciting, this panel, a lot of relevancy to those key mission areas from the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, as well as our CNOs Get Real, Get Better. A big part of that is really understanding the systems we're delivering, understanding how they impact war fighting, how they improve our tactical advantage, and are really part of delivering cyber secure systems as well. Also at the bottom there, that NAVWAR strategic vectors speaks to Rear Admiral Smalls, our SysCom commander here at NAVWAR in San Diego, his strategic objectives that talk to digitization. So there's some really great discussion from the panel as it relates to that. And then on the far right are some top level areas as a PEO and the team here that we really focus on and the 10 program managers we have here at PEOC4I, and they are this notion of sailor self-sufficiency, which really speaks to, in this era of strategic competition, our support models need to shift so that that sailor or Marine at the edge has the tools to organically cyber defend and support that platform without being able to reach back. And so as much as we might have been able to in the past. And so that's one area we are really focused on. I'll talk a little bit about DevOps and how important that is to us a bit. And then lastly, digitization. And all three of those really feed into the panel discussion today. So I'm really excited to learn and listen from these distinguished panelists on their site picture as they did research very relevant to what we're doing. And on the next slide, I just wanted to touch for a moment on acquisition as it relates to the cyber threat. And as a PEO, and we have a wonderful program office here, PMW 130, that's charged with delivering cyber tools to the United States Navy at multiple echelons of command. And, you know, some of the lessons we've thought through as we address what we recognize as a growing threat and a very dynamic one. And so first off is just that from an engineering, acquisition, and fielding perspective, delivery of systems, again, back to that DevOps for faster updates. that DevOps piece of moving the customer of the capability, the warfighter and the developer, and the team that operates and supports the platform that delivers those capabilities closer together. Resiliency of critical functions, increasing the redundancy of paths and capacity there, censoring our networks and system more, identifying improved tools with emerging capabilities out there, being more proactive to what we're finding and reacting, recognizing when we deliver a piece of code and the technical stack under it, it's a dynamic cyber fight, and we're going to need to be able to pivot rapidly to respond to that. And then just an improved situational awareness overall. Our team delivers those capabilities and then meshes them together with other warfighting threads to create a holistic picture to the commander where she or he is, to be able to take that information and merge it with other warfare domains and make tactical decisions or strategic decisions, as the case may be. And then, again, just that being able to take in vast quantities of data from these sensors and other means and making sense of it and analyzing it both in the wake, but as also as time progresses, as new data comes in and is prioritized. So we're really excited about those efforts. And again, the panel really speaks to a lot of these threads, and in one in particular, that digital modeling. Next slide, please. And so here I just wanted to talk about that speed of delivery as it relates to this panel today, from a cyber perspective. One of the things we recognize as we build in cyber up front, and we've been on this journey of really making sure that at the requirements phase, through the design, delivery, and then this iterative DevOps phase, that right up front, cyber is a part of every consideration for the system. It is an inherent requirement in everything we're doing that the system is resilient and can respond to that growing threat. And speed is really essential to meeting that threat. You must be able to pivot quickly to various portions of the technical stack to really get the outcomes we need. Not being able to respond because of the nature or architecture of the system is a key inhibitor of our ability to meet that mission. And so some of the papers here today talk about that modeling and digital threads and digital twins. Those are all a big part of that. One of the key areas we do think about as well is we recognize that on ships and submarines and some of our tactical shore station and expeditionary warfighters, they will operate in periods of being disconnected and not able to reach back to some of the capacity we have in shore. And so, and many of our shore processing nodes. And so a big part of this is finding that balance as acquisition professionals and working with the warfighter and working with the requirements folks and determining what's that balance of capability that's organic on the platform, on the ship, on the submarine, on that remote tactical station, or what can reside more centrally and be a support back to those platforms. And so those complexities are a big challenge and things that we work through. And then how much scalability and recovery can we have? Next slide, please. And this is my last one before we're going to turn into the panel, but I did want to take a moment and kind of just reinforce this discussion of DevOps and how important it is as a mindset. This is an industry best practice, I know, with the software pathways discussions and others throughout the day. What a big part of this it is to leveraging this industry best practice to rethinking how we deliver these capabilities. And we've been on this journey for a number of years. We have a number of programs that are vested in how we approach it, from our networks and applications, but also some of our more hardware intensive systems in signals intelligence and RF comms. And so it is really that cultural mindset of having the developers in this constantly iterative loop with the customer, the warfighter, but also the operator of these systems, those sailors and Marines and the leadership that are entrusted with maintaining and securing that gear, all in a continuous loop. And again, kind of speaking to that model driven, we've been on a journey of developing more and more granular models, more and more automation to really be able to understand the systems up front and then be able to digital twin these systems in an elastic cloud-based environment to really check what our model said we would have and then see how it operates in this virtual environment before we then put it out to sea. And then once it's at sea, taking data off these platforms and learning from it. So anyway, again, just a moment to set the table, but now I'm more excited to really talk to the experts here and get their thoughts and perspectives. So I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Dacus, who's going to walk us through his really impressive paper. So, sir, over to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank MPS for letting me play a part in this. I would like to also thank my co-author, also a professor at Air Force Cyber College, and he was previously the director of the College of Joint Strategic Studies at within the College of Information and Cyberspace at Fort McNair. I first became interested in this broad issue way back in 2013 when I read the Defense Science Board's Resilient Military Systems and the Advanced Cyber Threat. And the report made it clear that numerous weapon systems designs had been exfiltrated by the Chinese. I went on to write a paper about how DoD could better motivate its contractors to design and build more secure systems. This latest paper again deals with our response to intellectual property theft, but on a more general national level rather than exclusively in national defense. Obviously, we think protecting national security is still paramount, but the issue is really the basic protection of property rights that have been so instrumental in building this country's prosperity and where we are currently failing. Please note the disclaimer, the views expressed in this presentation are our own and no one else's. The first obligatory question to ask yourself is, how bad is the problem? Right away, we run into problems here, of course, because cost estimates for IP theft can best be characterized as guesses. Nevertheless, it's still useful to pursue order of magnitude metrics that can be helpful in determining how energetic our response should be. The most repeated estimate is that of the IP Commission in 2017, with an inflation-adjusted estimate roughly double that of the projected U.S. software market in 2022. So very substantial cost. But just last week, Cyber Reason, a cybersecurity firm, reported that a single extended malicious campaign known as Operation Cuckoo Bees exfiltrated IP worth over $1 trillion by itself. Another way to examine the problem or the damage done is to determine the pervasiveness or lack thereof of the problem. In a relatively small study of CFOs, 1 in 5 companies said China stole their IP in the past year. Although this was a relatively small study of 23 CFOs, the results are consistent with previous work. And also a poignant anecdote here. Chinese IP theft is widely recognized as having decimated our solar panel industry, causing over 30 bankruptcies. Finally, the stakes are clearly quite high, with IP-intensive industries employing tens of millions of Americans in well-paying jobs. According to Deloitte, IP can constitute up to 80% of a single company's value. So theft means it's likely curtains for companies that are highly reliant on the promise of their IP for survival. So we will examine both the supply and demand sides of in a hypothetical market for IP theft. The supply side is represented by the portfolio of U.S. innovations, coupled with how well or poorly they're protected. Ideally, obviously, the private sector should bear the burden of fully protecting their own IP. But since many, perhaps most, of today's innovations involve information goods, it is useful to briefly explain why the private sector's incentives might not lead to adequate investment in cybersecurity. The presence of externalities really undergirds it all. That is, the organization or individual responsible for securing a system often does not bear the full cost of failure. The individual bots in a botnet are perhaps the clearest example of this phenomenon, but we also witness it virtually every time there is a major data breach, as consumers often bear the brunt of the cost. Several forces dictate that a company reach market with its application quickly if it is to remain in business. Network effects occur when a greater number of people make using the application or platform make it more valuable to consumers, which stands in direct contrast to the typical downward sloping demand curve. Technological lock-in involves costs when switching platforms. Just think if DoD switched from Windows operating systems to Apple, the cost would be astronomical. In addition, low marginal costs are typical with information goods because another download or search engine query does not cost much. And rising marginal costs really have historically been quite helpful competitive limit on the size of firms, but serve no such function with many information goods. Finally, of course, application bundling can help kickstart network effects and technological lock-in. It all adds up to significant market power for the first to market. So get it out fast and get it right by version 3.0 was born. This incentive, so it's notable also that this incentive structure can be especially pronounced for small firms because they often suffer from a lack of surplus capital to invest in cybersecurity. Oh, not too far. So turning to the demand side, so we have a tendency to focus on rapidly developing our IP, potentially at the expense of securing it. Meanwhile, the Chinese are especially adept at exploiting advances for their own benefit. China outstrips the rest of the world in the number of engineering PhDs it produces. In fact, their number of PhDs is likely to roughly double the US's number by 2025. Now, their PhD programs and graduates may not be quite as strong as the US's, but this is a staggering number of graduates, a staggering number of knowledgeable people to throw at the problem of adapting others' technologies. China not only has plenty of educated people to throw at the problem, but also money. It leads the world by a wide margin in later phase R&D spending. And of course, the last three are more macro level here, but so China is an authoritarian state, so there's certainly theoretically no issue as far as getting the purloined IP to those who can best use it. And historically, though this may be changing, China's soft monetary policy has been very helpful in making their products very cost competitive to help gain and lock in market share. And of course, China has extensive experience in technology transfer and IP theft through the years. So putting the pieces together, this is just a simple notional visualization of China's IP theft calculus. As difficult as it is to measure, it comes down to estimating the Chinese estimating costs compared to benefits. Well, obviously, what we would like to do is have more of our innovation, more of our intellectual property fall below the break-even line there and be left alone, rather than be an easy hack decision for the CCP. And as I'm sure you are all aware, and we'll discuss in a few minutes, our national leadership has spent much of its time thinking about and occasionally acting on Chinese behaviors, while we implore leaders to think more about what we do on the cost or supply side, specifically targeted at intellectual property. So while the U.S. has certainly focused on the cost side of the equation, it's mostly been, though not entirely, as Erin will talk about, it's mostly been from the point of view of the consumer, the Chinese. For many years, it seems, our policy was to jawbone or name and shame the Chinese into discontinuing their practices. In more recent times, President Trump identified IP theft as one of the reasons for slapping about $200 billion in tariffs on the Chinese. And so far, President Biden has kept these tariffs. In addition, since legal pursuit of the Chinese is essentially pointless, just goes more to name and shame, Chinese hackers are not among the most commonly indicted international actors, but numerous indictments have been handed down against them. Perhaps more hopefully, in early 2020, China and the U.S. entered into a phase 1 agreement that dealt with, among other things, internal measures China will take in a wide range of activities, but also dealing with protecting IP rights, both externally and within China. Despite all the pressuring, early indications are that they're perhaps not living up to this as much as we would like. But there's still room for hope there. China has a long history of disrespect for property rights, even going back to Confucianism's collectivist mindset. So they have their work cut out for them as far as enforcing IP rights. But nevertheless, a determined authoritarian government should be able to markedly increase respect for IP over time. But in the meantime, we should do more to protect our IP ourselves. So how do we determine what to protect? There are several straightforward ways to accomplish this. First of all, the Chinese are nice enough to tell us what's important to them every 5 years. And the technologies identified in their 5-year plans have been roughly consistent, squared pretty nicely with hacking events we have commemorated with indictments of Chinese nationals. So that's a useful place to start. In addition, patent and trademark applications specifically identified for their potential value to national security is also a promising avenue, though obviously not every worthwhile advance is protected by patent. Finally, of course, we can have authorities on science, technology, and business identified technologies too. Erin will talk about the critical and emerging technologies list, which has been generated on and off for decades. So once we have identified the technologies to protect, what do we do? So I'm not trying to be too ambitious here, to not venture too far from shore, so to speak, with these recommendations. But recently, the Small Business Administration kicked off a cybersecurity grant pilot, $3 million in cybersecurity grants to small businesses. Assuming this turns out to be successful, the program could be expanded with some oversight and include national security oriented organizations or advisory boards comprised of the type of people who serve on the Defense Science Board or similar organizations. You would not want to make membership and exclusively governmental, as government officials and bureaucrats are likely to be lousy judges of promising technologies, especially in the early stages.
Yeah, Mr. Dacus, thank you so much. I know we're kind of a little bit at time. Is there one kind of closing thought you might have for the team? And then we already got some great questions for you later on, sir. Over.
Oh, I'm on my last slide. I've got a couple more sentences. So at a minimum, the kind of services offered to critical infrastructure providers should be extended to innovators if they're not already included. Though what specifically should trigger the availability of these protections is worthy of further discussion. So one thought is to have a specialized team of advisors that is knowledgeable of the struggles of small businesses to help them navigate and also smart on cybersecurity to help them navigate securing their inventions. As far as other ideas, favorable tax treatment of cybersecurity expenditures is a given and could and should extend as far as what we do for R&D. That's the end of my presentation. Sorry for going a little bit over.
No worries. Great discussion. Looking forward to the QA there, and well done. And now I'll turn it over to Mr. Fred Schenker. Over to you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me just share. Okay. I think you can see slides and you can hear me. Thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to just acknowledge the other folks that helped prepare this presentation. Bill Nichols, who's my colleague at the Software Engineering Institute, which is part of Carnegie Mellon University, and also Tyler Smith from Adventium Labs. We've collaborated in a bunch of different things over the last few years, and this is really this topic has been on the tops of our minds for a while. The point here is that it's difficult to understand whether or not an organization that claims to be producing digital engineering artifacts is really effective at what they're doing. And we are trying, our research is in the area of just trying to establish some way of assessing the effectiveness of an organization's digital engineering practices. So I'll get past this slide. The problem statement is that the digital engineering can have a huge impact. And the primary way that we're seeing it, and in the context of cyber, we think that you could be using your digital environment to advance your cyber practices earlier in life cycle. So you don't, maybe you can't realize the complete test until you have physical hardware and you're completely deployed. But there are things that you can do using digital models that allow you to shift your evaluation, your cyber evaluations earlier in life cycle. Now, our experience with this particular topic is sort of limited to cyber physical or weapon systems, things that are, that have physical elements to them. And we've just seen the benefits of digital engineering impact so many other areas in engineering and in other domains. We're just we haven't seen the realization specifically with respect to the cyber physical domain, and we understand that there isn't it's not like a silver bullet. You can't just like spend lots of time doing modeling and analysis and expect that you are actually improving the likelihood of attaining the program goals. It's just it's not like a lock that it's going to happen. You can spend an awful lot of time wandering in the desert trying to figure out what you want to do with your modeling activity. So we there has been a fair amount of effort in COSI and in other areas with respect to trying to define measures for digital engineering. We are trying to take that one step further and say, okay, we've got these measures, but how do you know if the organization is effective, and how can you actually maybe think of evaluating an organization with respect to digital engineering? So normally when you use a phrase like the landscape is littered, it's not a positive story. But in our case, there really are tons of examples of how digital methods have improved legacy practices. I mean, the most, the most obvious one that comes to mind, is the impact that has happened with mechanical design using computer-aided design tools. The initial jump from paper to, and I'm old enough to remember paper, to 2D CAD was a huge leap. And then 3D CAD, I mean, it's gotten to the point where it's almost expected that you're going to do your mechanical design using 3D CAD. And who would have expected that, 30 years ago when the technology first started coming out? And the same is true for a lot of the tools that are derivative or that really enable those design tools. So, for example, finite element analysis is in many cases integrated right into the 3D CAD environment, so that you can actually do your design and test it using a finite element tool, and get reasonably high fidelity responses, all in a very fast and iterative process, without having to really I mean, it's not really specialized engineering anymore. It's become almost expected that that's the way. And the same is true with circuit analysis using SPICE or other areas. I know that in logistics and maintenance, people are using 3D models to imagine how they're actually going to write their maintenance procedures and evaluate them, use calculations using the 3D tools to estimate their mean time to repair. I mean, we're using these models all over the place for huge benefit. And we haven't really seen this occur when we talk about these cyber physical systems, and specifically embedded computing. So we're talking about, you know, the processing that's happening on the platform, and how do we know that we're going to be able to meet our scheduling constraints, and we're not going to run out of memory, and in the case of cyber, we're going to be resilient to vulnerabilities and threats. So we've created this picture here that shows sort of like a feedback loop that illustrates how a digital model, that would be the thing in yellow, can inform a legacy modeling process that's in blue. So if we use the digital model in between our requirements in this case and system design, and analyze that, we can enhance the quality and push the quality of the system further quicker than we could without it. And also, we're able to identify issues. I hate to say defects, because this early in life cycle, we often don't call these things defects. We call them something else. But there are things that need to be changed, and we can use the tools to inform that. So when we have discovering defects late, we have a picture like what we see on the left, which is from a paper that was written by some of our colleagues almost 10 years ago. But the things haven't really changed that much, where we find that we introduce most of our errors is early and in design, but we don't find them until we get to unit and integration and system test. And what that does is it adds a multiplier to the cost of what it takes to solve these problems. If we're able to find them and fix them earlier, we save tremendous amounts of money. And this translates into huge plus ups at the end of contracts, which which take away from other things that we could be spending our money on, and are things that we certainly should be avoiding. So on the right, we have a picture, and the right-hand column, I mean, the left-hand column reflects what the left-hand, the center column, and the farthest right one is what we think it ought to be using digital engineering practices. We think that's the level of discovery you should be able to find that much earlier in life cycle, and reduce things down to zero when we get down to field testing. So that's sort of the bar that we're setting. From our work, all of the authors have been supporting the Army Future Vertical Lift. There's a program called Joint Multi-Role Mission System Architecture Demonstration, which ran for about 7 or 8 years, ending last year. But this was one of the primary things, was to assess the effect of digital engineering on embedded computing systems for the mission system part of a cyber physical system. This is a graph from Raytheon, one of the performers, and this was part of their lessons learned briefing. And you'll notice that they actually they did things not as well as they could have, because surprise, surprise, it's not like a practice that is internalized by these organizations, and they started things too late, and it's too bad. But they do reflect that the black line, which is the measured cumulative, is significantly lower than the red line, which is if they had done the work without using the digital engineering tools. And if they had actually done it the right way, they would have hit the green line, which is even better, obviously, than the other two. And we should note that early increase in effort is required. We're doing things that we normally don't do until the end. We're doing them earlier. So that means more people earlier in life cycle. And that leads to overall reduction in effort because we find those things earlier and we're able to fix them earlier. That's important because it's a culture change for the for the program that's using digital engineering. So when we get to actually measuring digital engineering, we found that that effective use is more about culture than it is about ROI. So you can see what happens, but not why. And what we asked ourselves is, what are they actually using the artifacts for? Are they actually using it as an informed aspect of design? Or are they just modeling things that they've already designed using their CAD tool as a way to show that they are just checking the box? What is actually modeled? So are we actually modeling black boxes or white boxes? And there are IP issues, we know, but it's important to understand what they're actually doing. And when defects escape, what are they actually doing to try to figure out how it could have been found within their environment? So also legacy measures don't always work. So we need to be shifting what we're actually thinking about. We all agree that effective use of digital engineering results in higher quality with less effort, but we can't be just using the tool and creating measures that are self-fulfilling. This is a version, everybody has their version of the V, and we created ours as well. But this basically just shows how the V, or how we can use the digital engineering or in digital artifacts to inform the various lifecycle phases and reduce your overall program risk. So those yellow boxes that descend on the very left side are just higher levels of fidelity of the same model in many cases. And we can use the same analyses in a continuous environment using DevSecOps, for example, to, as the things get more refined, to verify and validate that our digital representation is actually meeting our program goals. And I'm just going to conclude, because I know I'm running out of time, but the digital engineering is a major change for cyber physical system development. We think it has impact over domains such as cyber, and we're very excited, but it's much broader than that. But certainly you can apply threat models and to design practices and use the digital environment to get insight early in life cycle. We encourage people that are applying digital engineering not to focus exclusively on quantitative measures, which can be skewed by all kinds of things. And you need to identify practices that distinguish an organization that is just checking the boxes from one that's actually incorporating the DE culture into their development approach. So understanding that there's a learning curve and dealing with that, that there's culture change and how the DE is being used. So for example, in the design process, as opposed to, and whether it is effective. So it's important to realize that some problems are actually not appropriate for digital engineering and could actually suck more effort into solving it virtually than it would take to solve it from the actual thing. And you have to defer some of those things. So that requires understanding how to distinguish between those types of things. Although we advise that you should, in the beginning, err on the side of over modeling. So I want to thank everyone for their attention and wait until we get to the panel. I think the other authors are also going to be available for the panel discussion.
Terrific.
So
hey, thanks so much. Great discussion. And now I'll turn it over to Erin Butkowski. Over to you. Looking forward to your presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today to present alongside these incredible panelists. My name is Erin Butkowski, and I'm a senior analyst with the Government Accountability Office. I joined the GAO almost 8 years ago, and since that time, I've had the chance to work on a variety of topics ranging from FEMA's disaster response to DoD's pursuit of artificial intelligence. One of the more recent reviews I was a part of looked at DoD's protection of critical technologies, which is the focus of this presentation today. So before we dive into how the department protects its critical technologies, I'd like to start by at least providing a general framework or a working definition of what a critical technology is. For GAO's purposes, we have defined critical technologies as those that provide new or improved capabilities necessary to maintain the U.S. technological advantage. This is a definition GAO has been using for quite some time, since at least the mid-2000s when we've been taking a look at the area. In October 2020, the White House published a national strategy for critical and emerging technologies that identifies 20 broad technology areas that the U.S. considers critical. So these can be seen in the excerpt of the strategy that's on the slide. And you may have noticed that both the definition I provided and these technology areas are exceedingly broad, which I think rightfully so has caused some issues for DoD when it comes to effective protection. But I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. And so now that we have kind of an idea of what a critical technology is, I'll share a little bit about how they're protected across the government at large. The first thing I want to note is that there's no single federal agency that shoulders the responsibility for protecting critical technologies. Rather, as the slide mentions, responsibility for the 8 programs that at least the GAO has been tracking in this area is shared across numerous agencies, including the Department of Defense, of course. For example, programs related to export control are led by State and Commerce, while the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. is led by the Treasury with input from other relevant agencies. So these programs are really meant to act together as a safety net to prevent U.S. critical into the hands of our adversaries. And so now moving on a little bit from having an idea of what critical technologies are, who protects them at large, we can talk about DoD. And really DoD is largely the owner of most of our critical technologies, as you can imagine, living in the national security realm. And the Department of Defense has had this area on its radar for a very long time. As you can hopefully see in the figure on the slide, the department relies on a variety of its entities to protect the different aspects of its technologies. So it's not always the finished product, that technology as a whole, that just needs protecting. It's the supply chain to build the technology, the software that goes into the technology. So all of those different pieces each have their own kind of protection requirements. And actually, one of the trickier parts when it comes to protecting critical technologies is identifying the technologies that are critical and worth kind of devoting those resources to. And so dating back to the 1970s, DoD has tried to identify these technologies first through its militarily critical technologies list that was published annually until 2011. For a variety of reasons, this list kind of fell out of favor, and GAO found that updates were no longer occurring regularly, and we reported that in the absence of a single authoritative list, DoD offices were using alternatives produced by other federal agencies, like the Department of State's U.S. Munitions list. So beginning in 2016, DoD leadership sort of revamped the process and tasked the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering with generating an annual prioritized list of critical technologies to guide protection efforts. In 2019, the responsibility for this list shifted to the Protecting Critical Technology Task Force that was established in late 2018. So this was the lead DoD entity for protecting critical technologies at the time of our review, and where the majority of the information you'll see in the report or on the following slides came from. And with the formation of the task force, DoD started to take another hard look at how it was protecting its critical technologies. Specifically, the task force's stated goal was to stop the exfiltration of critical technologies by reforming the ways DoD protects them and their related sensitive information. So you can imagine, with an agency the size of DoD, that was no small task. So to get started, one of the first things that the task force realized was that they wanted to figure out a repeatable process for identifying what truly is critical across DoD and setting mandatory protection measures to really get everyone on the same page, not just about what it is we need to protect, but how we have to protect it. And an overview of this process is shown on the slide, and it consists of 4 steps. So the first step requires DoD components to use the criteria established by the task force to identify elements of its technologies that are critical. So for example, if a component, I'll pick on the Army, says a particular tank is critical, the process would then require them to specify what it is about that tank that's critical. Is it a sensor? Is it a piece of software? Is it the wheel? Things like that to really narrow in on what needs to be protected rather than just saying this tank is critical to U.S. national security. And the criteria for what makes a technology critical, according to the task force, was based on the severity of loss or compromise to the mission. And it was divided into 3 levels. So for example, a loss or compromise of a level 1 technology, which DoD considers the most critical, would result in mission failure. Whereas a level 2 or 3 would result in varying degrees of mission degradation. And so moving on from that first step, once the task force receives all the input from the components, it takes a holistic view to make sure that similar technologies are consistently ranked as either a level 1, 2, or 3. So what that means in practice is if, again, I'll pick on the Army, if the Army identified a particular sensor as a level 1 critical technology, and then the Air Force, who has a similar or the same sensor, came back and said it's a level 2, the task force would talk to both entities, they would figure out the rationale behind why they chose what they chose, and then they would make the final determination for what criticality level that sensor would be protected at. And once all of that is done, the final list is generated. The task force envisioned that the list would be communicated internally and externally to all with a hand in protection. So that's not just the program offices that own the technology, it's the folks that work for foreign military sales, it's the folks at State Department who have a role to play in making sure they don't get export licenses for some of these technologies. So they wanted to get it into the hands of everyone that needed it. And then once that happened, the DoD components would be expected to implement the assigned protection measures based on the criticality level attached. So what that means, one of the proposed mandatory protection measures that the task force came up with was to provide a threat briefing to all personnel with access to the technology annually for a level 1, again, that's the most critical, every 3 years for a level 2, and just an initial threat assessment for new personnel for a level 3. So you can kind of see the more resources get devoted to the more critically identified technologies. And that held true for the other type of protection measures. This is just one example that we pulled in our report specifically. And the task force by design was a temporary entity. And so they kind of had in mind that whichever DoD entity owned the process moving forward, they would consistently monitor the implementation of these protection measures and also ensure that all 4 of these steps occurred annually to make sure the list was current and up to date and in the hands of everyone that needed it. So at the time of our review, the task force was kind of still in step 2. They were just doing that holistic view. This was the component's first time using the criteria to identify what's critical and breaking it down into the really smallest pieces. So it was taking a bit of time. So where we left off was the task force was just about to be done. And then they were also figuring out what those final mandatory protection measures were going to be. They had a strong draft of them, but they were still circulating it kind of around the Pentagon, making sure they had buy-in. And while the task force had a strong outline and strong idea for what they wanted to do, we did note a couple gaps that are highlighted on this slide. So for example, as I mentioned, the task force knew it wanted to get it into the hands of everyone that needed it. But we found that the dissemination chain that was used previously, that the task force was still planning to continue to use for this list, wasn't reaching everyone that it was intended to or that it needed to. So even within DoD, I mentioned foreign military sales a little bit ago, that office, officials within that office told us that they don't ever remember receiving the list. Specifically, we asked about the 2019 list, and that was the same for external agencies. So when we talked to State, Commerce, and Treasury, they also had not received a list from DoD, but really wanted to understand what they needed to be on the lookout for when it comes to kind of the defense weapons and whatnot. And so we really wanted to put this on the radar for DoD as one of those things that as you're finalizing, as you're putting things pen to paper, keep this in mind, that you might want to take another look at how you plan to do this. And that's also in line with what we saw when it came to those mandatory protection measures. I know I said they were in draft and they were a strong draft, but one thing that they weren't really thinking through at that time was how they were going to make sure that they were being implemented at the program level, and also how they were going to periodically check to see that these are still the right protection measures. As we know, our adversaries change tactics very quickly and technology changes very quickly. So that was another thing we raised up to the department. And ultimately, we made 3 recommendations in this report to DoD. The first gets at that piece of making sure that you have a formal communication process so that all relevant entities receive the list and know what you are thinking is critical and know what you want to be protected. The second is to identify, develop, and periodically review appropriate metrics to assess the implementation and sufficiency of those assigned protection measures. And then the third was just to finalize the decision of who in DoD is going to take over the process once the task force was disbanded. We had talked a lot to the task force. They knew their charter was running out, but DoD, was still in the process of figuring out where to put things next. And we just wanted to make sure that all of these efforts that they had undertaken didn't go to waste because they couldn't find a home. So since we finished, the department has taken a number of steps. To start, the task force ended up publishing its 2021 critical technologies list with updated instructions for disseminating throughout, there we go. For disseminating throughout the department and to the outside relevant agencies, which you can see closed our first recommendation. And then in June 2021, the task force was officially disbanded and a memo from the Deputy Secretary of Defense shifted protection responsibilities to various DoD entities, specifically the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And these actions were sufficient to close our third recommendation. Now, the one that's still open is the second, and that relates to the protection measures and how to measure them. So since assuming responsibility from the task force, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering kind of decided to tweak the process a little bit and make it their own. And so the last time we spoke with them, they're pushing a focus on understanding where the technology resides. So more, is it at the subcontractor? Is it at the contractor? Is it already in the Pentagon? And then developing relevant protection measures to match. So since these are still ongoing, our recommendation remains open. And where GAO is going, I inadvertently foreshadowed this a second ago. We'll continue to monitor the area in a couple of ways. So the first is through our annual recommendation follow-up. This happens for any recommendation that GAO makes to any agency. We check back to see what actions have been taken. In this case, it's related to those performance measures and the metrics at DoD. So we'll continue to do that again this year. And also, second, for this area in particular, It'll be watched through our biannual high risk report that you can see is noted on the slide. As of the last update in 2021, DoD and the other agencies responsible for this area partially met all 5 criteria that we look for. And they may change these ratings in 2023 as we start looking again. But I did want to mention that DoD is not solely responsible for getting this area closed on our high risk report. It does pertain more to that like whole of government 8 programs that I mentioned earlier. But DoD, as the owner of most of these technologies, plays a really important role. And so that is one way that we track the area. And with that, I know I'm probably coming close on time, and I want to make sure we have a chance for everyone to ask questions of these amazing panelists. So I will pause and welcome anything we have in the Q&A.
All right. Well, hey, fantastic discussion, Ms. Butkowski. I think since you have the mic, our first question, I figure we'll ask you the first question of the panel, and I'm reading it from the chat. I'm going to read the first sentence or so. And then I as I was reading your paper in preparation, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was this notion of dual use, so much of what we do in the Department of Defense leverages the commercial sector and that dual use piece. But we have a great question from our audience there. And so is the critical military technologies list routinely evaluated like the munitions list by companies complying with Itar? So maybe take a crack at that and maybe give us your sense of that dual use question. So over to you.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's a great question. In theory, what DoD is doing, they may have missed a year here or there, but they are updating their list internally on an annual basis. So now with this new process, it's being spread outside of the department, much like the munitions list. It's not made public though. The actual list is classified at the secret level. And so it is kept kind of close hold because when we talk to the officials from the department, there's a risk of spreading it too broadly. If you know what we're protecting, it's easier to come after. So contractors that are working on that will have an idea. They will be notified of what technologies they have to implement based off of, the list. I don't know if they'll get a chance to see the whole list, but it is updated regularly. It's shared with who needs to know it, at least the last time we checked. And we're hoping that that continues in the future because it's a strong process and it gets to the kind of whole collaboration that needs to happen to protect these critical technologies.
Hey, terrific. Thank you. Great discussion. Okay, the next one here, I'm going to lean in and read a little bit here, is for Mr. Dacus. How do you balance our requirement to protect IP data against our need for industrial innovation? So that challenge between balancing those two. So look forward to your thoughts there. Over to you.
Well, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, certainly. And there's really no sense in developing the industrial innovation if you're not going to protect it and actually realize the benefits. So, but I really do think we need to put our money where our mouth is as far as cybersecurity is concerned, and actually step in and help these private organizations help secure their technologies, either through financial help or at least very favorable tax treatment. So I don't know that it really needs to be a balancing act here, but I think we let the private sector loose to innovate, but help them as far as the protection part.
Yeah, it's great. Good feedback there. The sense that if you're going to run the research to innovate, you want to protect it. I think a little bit of some of the open source technologies we've been able to leverage as a nation and a department, that I would imagine sometimes industry, to get adoption of things, wants to share is that factor in that, any thought on the open source side of things? Is it just kind of baked into their original business plan for innovation?
I'm sorry, I don't entirely, if you could
Sure.
rephrase the question a little bit. Yeah.
Sure. Looking at the question, there was a discussion on specifically about, hey, that we want to protect our data, but we also want to have a culture of innovation. And sometimes that requires sharing of information so that others, maybe other industry partners or the customer or others, are innovating on your product a bit. And so I might be reading too much into the question, but my sense is there might be some downsides to protecting too much, that you're not able to innovate as quickly, I guess, if I captured that right. And I was using the open source software or, some of those platforms as kind of an example of that. Any thoughts there?
I don't know that I really have a good answer on that. I think businesses are quite able to determine what's sensitive and they proprietary, and they don't want to share it. It's not in their financial interest. And but of course, I think anything that you could share that wouldn't necessarily expend proprietary innovation, information, I would go ahead and do that. So I mean, it certainly a balancing act, and I don't have a particularly great solution on that. I think businesses will be pretty wise as to what they share and what they don't.
Excellent. No, that's a great feedback. Thank you.
I think on the digital engineering side, because please. This is absolutely applicable to that, there are that information would get out into sort of the shared space earlier than it would in other cases, potentially before and a technology is deemed to be critical. And there are probably challenges there as well, in addition to the ones that deal with companies being able to stay financially viable by keeping their proprietary information proprietary. On the side of the government, they need to see some of that capability in their labs before, as part of the design review process. It just seems like it's a lot more, things might get a lot more exposed as we move to the left. Over.
Yeah.
Anybody?
No, it's a great feedback. I was thinking, and back to you again, as you looked at the modeling piece, is your sense that you had talked about the investment in creating the right test environment, that investment in building these models, but then there's sometimes where you may just want to just solve the challenge, right? And so any advice to industry partners or others who might be dialed in on indicators of finding that right sweet spot of investment?
I'll toss that out to my colleagues if you guys want to jump in there. I think the primary thing that was clear to us when we were looking at that data is that project managers are reticent to spend money that they know they're going to need when they get to the end of the life cycle to solve the problems. They just don't want to spend the money early on something that they don't know is going to pay for itself. And here we have data that shows that it does pay for itself if you do it right, but we're not getting people to jump in and just try to make it better. So that was the primary motivation for pointing that out.
Excellent.
I'll give one additional answer to Fred's comment, just kind of as a heuristic, I guess. I've observed over and over the difference between modeling for digital engineering and PowerPoint modeling, so to speak, is when you're forced to write something down carefully with explicit, unambiguous meaning. Just the fact of writing it down tends to teach you a lot and force you to think through your requirements better than you would have otherwise. So doing a PowerPoint model of what you want to build is much, much faster and cheaper, but it doesn't force you to work through the rigorous requirements analysis process that more rigorous modeling requires you to do. So my answer to the question of how do you know if you should be doing this kind of early engineering is, if you're starting to do your modeling work and you're changing, updating your requirements, it means you're probably getting value out of it. If you're not prompted to change any requirements, either A, you're not modeling rigorously, or B, you already know well enough what you're going to do that you're not going to get a lot of value out of the modeling.
Hey, thanks. No, that's terrific feedback, and I think that's really compelling. Well, I think we're at time here. So first, I want to thank our panel and a virtual round of applause for them and their terrific work here. So here in one clap, and then I'm sure our other colleagues attending are clapping as well. This is a fantastic discussion, and more importantly, some great research done by each and every one of you in your respective organizations and teams. Thanks again to the Naval Postgraduate School for hosting this event. It's been my honor, and I learned a lot, and I hope everyone did too. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of the conference.